Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Fort, and we are here for another poetry discussion. A poetry discussion that will take place or appear in 3 separate playlists here on the channel. The first, obviously, being the poetry discussion playlist, but the second is the National Poetry Month 2021. I don't know why this always gives me so much pause. National Poetry Month 2021 playlist. Here in the month of April, I will be doing a poetry discussion every day. In the month, 30 poetry discussions in 30 days. But the third playlist in which it will take place, in which it will appear, is New Hampshire from Robert Frost. This poem is a long one, so let's get into it. It is called The Star Splitter. And because it is a long one, I'm going to trip up at some point, so please bear with me. I'm very bad at reading aloud. If you were here, you know that. You know Orion always comes up sideways, throwing a leg up over our fence of mountains, and rising on his hands, he looks in on me, busy outdoors by lantern light, with something I should have done by daylight, and, indeed, after the ground is frozen, I should have done before it froze, and a gust flings a handful of waste leaves at my smoky lantern chimney, to make fun of my way of doing things, or else fun of Orion's having caught me. Has a man, I should like to ask, no rights these forces are obliged to pay respect to? So Brad McLaughlin mingled reckless talk of heavenly stars with hugger-mugger farming, till having failed at hugger-mugger farming, he burned his house down for the fire insurance and spent the proceeds on a telescope to satisfy a lifelong curiosity about our place among the infinities. What do you want with one of those blamed things? I asked him well beforehand. Don't you get one. Don't call it blamed. There isn't anything more blameless in the sense of being less a weapon in our human fight, he said. I'll have one if I sell my farm to buy it. There, where he moved the rocks to plow the ground and plowed between the rocks he couldn't move, few farms changed hands. So rather than spend years trying to sell his farm and then not selling, he burned his house down for the fire insurance and bought the telescope with what it came to. He had been heard to say by several, the best thing that we're put here for is to see the strongest thing that's given us to see with a telescope. The best thing that we're put here for is to see the strongest thing that's given to us. The best thing we're put here for is to see the strongest thing that's given us to see with a telescope. Someone in every town seems to me owes it to the town to keep one. In Littleton, it may as well be me. After such loose talk, it was no surprise when he did what he did and he burned his house down. Mean laughter went about the town that day to let him know we weren't the least imposed on. And he could wait. We'd see to him tomorrow. But the first thing next morning we reflected, if one by one we counted people out, for the least sin, it wouldn't take us long to get so we had no one left to live with. For to be social is to be forgiving. Our thief, the one who does our stealing from us, we don't cut off from the coming to church suppers. But what we miss, we go to him and ask for. He promptly gives it back. That is, if still uneaten, unworn out, or undisposed of. It wouldn't do to be too hard on Brad about his telescope. Beyond the age of being given one's gift for Christmas, he had to take the best way he knew how to find himself in one. Well, all we said was he took a strange thing to be roguish over. Some sympathy was wasted on the house, a good old timer dating back long. But a house isn't sentient. The house didn't feel anything, and if it did, why not regard it as a sacrifice, and an old-fashioned sacrifice by fire instead of a new-fashioned one at auction? Out of a house, and so out of a farm, at one stroke of a match. Brad had to turn to earn a living on the Concord Railroad as underticket agent at a station where his job, when he wasn't selling tickets, was setting out up track and down. Not plants as on a farm, but planets, evening stars, that varied in their hue from red to green. He got a good glass for $600. His new job gave him leisure for stargazing. Often, he bid me to come and have a look up at the brass barrel, velvet black inside, at a star quaking in the other end. I recollect a night of broken clouds and underfoot snow melted down to ice and melting further in the wind to mud. Bradford and I had out the telescope. We spread our 2 legs as we spread its 3, pointed our thoughts the way we pointed it, and standing at our leisure till the day broke, said some of the best things we ever said. That telescope was christened the Star Splitter, because it didn't do a thing but split a star in 2 or 3, the way you split a globule of quicksilver in your hand with one stroke of your finger in the middle. It's a star splitter if there ever was one, and ought to do some good if splitting stars a thing to be compared with splitting wood. We've looked and looked, but after all, where are we? Do we know any better where we are, and how it stands between the night to night, and a man with a smoky lantern chimney? How different from the way it ever stood. I think there are 2 lines in this poem which I really appreciate. The first one, to satisfy a lifelong curiosity about our place among the infinities. That's just a good poetic line, I think. The second one, if I can find it here, I should have marked it. Oh golly, it's not the one I tripped on. I'm sorry this is taking so much time. I should have marked it, but for to be social is to be forgiving. I think that those are... Robert Frost is really, really good for little almost platitudes, little lines like that which really don't moralize a situation, but moralize what it means to be something. To be social is to be forgiving. What a hell of a thing to realize. And what a hell of a thing for society to have possibly, it seems, in these days, lost. But the thing I really want to talk about here is there is an immediate disownership of Brad because he had forsaken the hard work of running a farm for the intellectual curiosity of gazing at the stars. Now, he's not outcast for this. We make a very good point of that. Robert Frost makes a very good point of that. He's not an outcast. He is not cast out. But he's marked. He's a little bit different. He's a little strange. Everyone in the town is willing to concede that. But everyone in the town accepts him thereafter for what he is. He is the owner of the telescope. He is the gazer of the stars. And the thing that is almost gives this poem a Bukowski quality, because it's something which is not directly stated. It's stated directly later in the poem, but it is not moralized or drawn out into philosophy in the way that sometimes poets, including Robert Frost, are wont to do, is the fact that our speaker here was not going to judge Brad for this. How do we know that? We know that because the very beginning of this poem, Orion always comes up sideways, throwing a leg up over our fence of mountains, and rising on his hands, he looks in on me, busy outdoors by lantern light with something I should have done by daylight, and indeed, after the ground is frozen, I should have done before it froze. And a gust flings a handful of waste leaves at my smoky lantern chimney to make fun of my way of doing things, or else fun of Orion's having caught me. Has a man, I should like to ask, no rights these forces are obliged to pay respect to? We begin this poem with stargazing. We begin our trek into our speaker's reality with stargazing. And indeed, with the stars gazing back at us. Orion catches our speaker here doing things by lantern light that he should have done by daylight. So what is the irony here? The irony here is that our speaker is left wanting to observe the stars in the same way that Brad does, but he is afraid to forsake his work life, his respectability. He is, however, still willing to indulge in that stargazing. But he still belongs to his work life. He still belongs to his responsibilities in a way that Brad does not. Oftentimes in these poems, oftentimes with the mythos around a poet, we'll take Bukowski again for example. Bukowski held his poetry, in some ways one might see the Bukowski's poetry as our speakers and Brad's stargazing. Bukowski's poetry was held above work, was held above jobs, but seen as his real work. Brad was willing to forsake his work for what he saw as his job to be the connection for the townfolk to the stars. Oftentimes in poetry, it is the speaker who is, let's be honest, for all intents and purposes, to someone reading poetry, the idyllic individual. The individual willing to hold his values and truths above societal norms and expectations. Oftentimes, most times, to anyone reading a poem and taking it seriously, let's be honest, that's the person seen as the hero. Oftentimes, the hero is the speaker. We have to view Bukowski in some type of heroic light. Because if we're reading his poetry without him forsaking what it means to be a standard individual and make a living, we wouldn't have his words. We wouldn't have his philosophy. We would not have his poetry. Here, our speaker is a stargazer. And for some purpose, for some intents, he is an individual which is susceptible to minimizing that work, as evidenced by the fact that he is doing this work at night when it should have been done by the day. He's willing to put that off in the name of whatever it is, whatever that realm of stargazing is, whatever it is in his world that exists in that same plane of being as does stargazing. In fact, he's unable to completely let go of that plane of existence during his important work, because while he's doing his important work, he is making what we are left to believe is an oft cited observation about Orion. This isn't the first time our speaker has had this observation about Orion. This is not the first time that our speaker has happened upon realizing that Orion always comes up sideways, throwing a leg up over our fence of mountains. This isn't the first time, because he says, you know, Orion always comes up sideways. This is a thought. This is a place. This type of thought is a place that our speaker has existed in a multitude of times. This is a place where our speaker has existed before and will exist again. And he obviously enjoys it there because, hey, he might not be willing to burn his farm down in order to have a telescope. But he never told Brad no. He never told Brad no. So I wonder what it is that keeps Robert Frost's poetry, Robert Frost's speaker in this poem, from being that hero instead of being party to that heroism. From my experience with Frost is very workaday. Frost is very yeoman-like. Frost is very subdued. Maybe I'm a victim of the moment, but not too long ago I read Neil Gaiman's Stardust. And it seems Neil Gaiman is the other side of that coin. Here we have Robert Frost willing to pay tribute to this individual of Brad. While and whereas someone of Neil Gaiman's thought process seems to own the Brad character as the speaker or main character. Speaker or protagonist. Protagonist, more than likely. In third-person fiction, it'd be a protagonist as opposed to the speaker. That's one of the things with first person as well as poetry that allows us to distance the entry point to the piece from the hero. I wonder why that is with Robert Frost. Why it is this subdued nature that seemed to compel him. Either way, from the very onset of this poem, there really was no question that Brad was going to be the hero. At least, not to poetic sentiment. That is all I have for this poetry discussion. Star Splitter. Look, I have new videos on the channel Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Mondays are for poetry, but this month, every day is for poetry. And Robert Frost is here on Saturdays. Mondays are for Langston Hughes, Tuesdays for Sylvia Plath, Wednesdays for Charles Bukowski, Thursdays for Emily Dickinson, Fridays for Charles Bukowski, Saturday for Frost, and Sunday is a bit of a toss in the air. Now, I hope to have you back, if not for anything else, then at least Saturday for Maple, which is, again, a bit of a trek, a longer poem, and we will have a poetry discussion for that as well. There's also a link to my personal channel to be found in the description below.